Battle cannons and frag missiles are going to be having a blast against hordes now, as their weapon type has just got a substantial buff. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where over the past few weeks we've been going over the rules changes from 9th edition as they've been coming out. Today we're looking at another Warhammer community article, which again delivers some pretty big changes to the game, this time significantly amping up the power of blast weapons versus hordes. We knew that they were going to be changing in some way from the previous rules previews, but now we've got our hands on the exact rule. It means we can begin to see what's meaningful both for blast weapons themselves and for the various units that they'll be taking aim at. So here is the new blast weapon rule as previewed by Warhammer Community. Basically some weapons have blast listed in their profile abilities. These are referred to as blast weapons, and in addition to their normal rules, you'll also have these following blast weapon rules apply. It sounds very much like they're going to be getting this in addition to any of the keywords they already have, so I suspect we'll see things like heavy weapons with the blast ability, much as we had in previous editions. Basically there's kind of two damage brackets where they get better at killing infantry units. Firstly, if a blast weapon targets a unit that has between 6 and 10 models, it always makes a minimum of 3 attacks. So say if you're rolling the dice for a d6 weapon and you roll a 1 or 2, then that result will be counted as 3. So against mid-sized units, that's going to be a small buff for heavy d6 blast weapons, but it's going to be really quite a big buff for heavy d3 blast weapons, as to basically mean that they're on max shots all the time. Furthermore, if you take aim at a target that has 11 or more models, you don't roll the dice to randomly determine how many attacks are made, instead you just make the maximum number of attacks available. So for example, if you threw a frag grenade with grenade d6 in the profile, then you just make an automatic 6-shot attack against that unit. You don't even have to roll. Now on a d6 shot weapon, this is an absolutely massive damage increase. But interesting to note that the heavy D3 blast weapons aren't actually going to get any more out of firing at an 11 plus unit than they would if taking aim at a unit of between 6 and 10. The article states that they'll be giving out the blast keywords to many individual weapons and they'll be listing them in the appendix for the 9th edition rulebook. It's actually going to be quite a big deal whether some edge case weapons get blast keyword or not. I think there's some that they could certainly go either way with depending on how they were feeling. So it's going to be interesting to have a look through that once we get the full rules. One example that I'm not 100% sure of will be plasma cannons. They did used to have blast templates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Games Workshop will definitely make them blast weapons with this new change. It'll certainly be interesting for anything that came out after 7th edition in terms of weapons and has a random number of shots, whether they'll all just get turned into blast weapons, or whether some of them will stay non-blast weapons. I suspect that we'll be getting the blast keyword added to any likely suspects going forwards as the codexes release. Apparently we'll be getting 174 weapons with the blast ability, so that's going to be quite a lot, and apparently every single faction will have access to at least one blast weapon. They've specifically called out that barbed stranglers, death strike missiles, D-cannons for Eldar, squig launchers for orcs, and phlegm bombardments for Nurgle are all going to be functioning as blast weapons under these new rules. The vast majority of grenade weapons are going to be blast, but interestingly enough, flamer weapons aren't going to be blast weapons, so unlike the templates of previous editions, they won't really get any benefits on firing against hordes. A little bit strange that one, but I guess it's kind of helpful for the second part of this rule, with which they're stated that blast weapons won't be able to be fired with vehicles or monsters when they're within engagement range, as per the tanks rule that we saw the other day. Basically they had a separate small rule on the community article stating this one, with the obvious disadvantages of not wanting to fire blast weapons at units that are right by you, as you're just likely to hurt yourself as much as them. And to be honest, I can see the sense of this one. You're not realistically going to be able to shoot enemy infantry that are clambering all over a mechanised artillery piece with that artillery, for example, without killing yourself. So I think theme-wise this does make quite a lot of sense, although it's undoubtedly a nerf to certain tanks that want to be advancing forward while packing heavy explosive weapons. Things like Space Marine Vindicators and Lehman Russ Demolishers aren't going to be able to use their main cannon if they get tied up in close combat. So to be honest, for those tanks, we're very much going to be getting back to the standard protocol of screening enemy assault infantry away from them and not letting them clamber all over them. I do sort of feel that this is a bit of a shame for some scenarios, having these guys be able to be taken out of action with a few guardsmen or a few Gretchen again. Isn't exactly the best thing in the world, but I guess at least they can still blaze away with them with their pintle-mounted weapons or hull heavy bolters and things, so they're still in kind of a better place than they were before. In any case, against hordes, they'll both be getting a massive damage increase, so this rule has a bit of a give and take sort of effect on these guys. So what might the implications of this be for the game? First of all, I think it's pretty weird just how disparate the buffs are going to be depending on what targets you're firing at and what blast weapons you're shooting with. I was honestly expecting that they might go with something a little bit more nuanced and scalable compared with one rule fits all, as the rule's going to make very different impacts on different blast weapons. D3 weapons I think actually got the biggest buff out of this, as they basically just get a 50% buff against everything that's over 5 models in size. If Space Marine plasma cannons do get this rule, then it's going to be very nice. You could have a squad of 4 plasma cannons just melting away enemy tactical squads and things, getting 3 shots per guy. The D6 shot weapons is really quite different depending on what target you're firing at, compared with the massive extra 50% damage output that D3 weapons get when targeting units between 6 and 10. D6 weapons getting a minimum of 3 shots is actually only a very small buff. If you math it out, then they'll get an average of 14% damage increase against such targets. They go from an average 3.5 shots to an average of 4 shots. But on the other hand, if they do start to take aim at true hordes with 11 or more models, it's actually getting a far better benefit than the D3 weapons do, and they increase by a ludicrous 70% damage output, going from an average of 3.5 shots to 6. This becomes even more of an all-or-nothing thing for anything even heavier, say a 2d6 shot rapid-fire battle cannon for Imperial Knights, which I suspect will be getting the blast rule. There's nothing to imply that the 2 sets of d6 shots are going to be treated separately, so if you do take aim at a unit between 6 and 10 in size, you'll only get any more shots out of it if you happen to roll a double 1, in which case it'll be upgraded to 3 shots. When firing against hordes of 11 or more though, then you get that same absolutely ludicrous 70% damage increase, as you'll just be firing flat 12 shots all the time. So basically having 1 extra model in a squad could be the difference between you getting hit by an extra 5 battle cannon shots, which to be honest is a bit of a strange idea. Thunderfire cannons will also be an example of this. They'll never actually be able to roll less than 3, so will get no advantage whatsoever when firing against units that are 10 or less, but again will go up to auto 12 shots when they're firing against a unit of 11 or more. Overall, this really means that blast weapons are going to really help you out against hordes, although bear in mind that seeing as points are changing, then I wouldn't be surprised if they do pay a bit of a points hike as a result. It is a bit weird, and I guess it might be a bit hard to balance if you have weapons like these that are available that are really powerful against one sub-unit type that most armies might not take. In any case, as this is a flat buff, I would expect blast weapons to cost a bit more after this change. If you're looking at it from the other point of view, then there's now really quite a strong incentive for you to game the system with taking your infantry squads and fielding things in units of 5 or 10 rather than 6 or more than 11. It's just going to be the sensible thing to do, because say if you did want to take an 11 strong unit, that extra guy could actually make your unit's durability significantly weaker just by including 1 extra man there. We also might see a fair few more 5-man Primaris squads running around. Things like aggressors might be taking multiples of 5s rather than 6s, as they don't want to be handing things like plasma cannons or Lehman Russ battle cannons a bit of free extra damage output when they target a max unit. It's worth bearing in mind that horde armies might not be affected by blast weapons all that much if they can make multiple small units. If you could run a ludicrous amount of 5 or 10 man units, then you're going to be a lot less affected by D6 blast weapons compared with if you're running units of 30 and stuff. Through other synergies, a lot of horde armies do want to be running bigger units anyway, but certain armies like Genestealer cults can be quite effective at small unit sizes and just have lots and lots of individual smaller units around, which might help their hordes get a little bit more resistant to enemy fire. I think this was always going to be the case, and blast weapons can't really be more effective against these sort of things unless you have like area effect weapons like we had back in 7th edition with blast templates. It's interestingly going to be slightly less of a buff to certain armies that can already do very well with blast weapons. Things like Basilisks or Kaschan Regiment Guard, for example, already get rerolls to increase the number of shots for their ordnance. So at least until we see new Guard Codexes come out or anything, these are just going to be a little bit weaker as a result, as you're sort of just doubling down on buffs that do the same thing. They will still be very useful buffs against anything that isn't a horde or 6 models or more strong, but they're just that little bit less useful as a result. Finally, the blast weapons in close combat special rule means that we're very much not going to be able to throw away the idea of many tanks needing screening. If artillery get locked up by infantry, then they're not going to be able to fire their main gun, so there's still a massive incentive to be able to do this. And the same goes for things like Lehman Russ battle tanks or demolishers, who won't be able to fire those blast weapons in combat. They will be far more resistant to this before, as they'll be able to blaze away with all their secondary weapons, but it just means that artillery parking lots are very much going to need a meaty screen to stop the enemy getting close to them. Otherwise, as before, the artillery will just be turned off. Overall, I think that on the whole this is a good change. I do feel that having blast weapons be more effective against hordes does make complete sense from a narrative point of view. Although obviously I'm on the side of everything being balanced, naturally they're going to need to be appointed appropriately so they're not just an auto-include and horde armies aren't just forced out of the game. I'd also hope that horde units that are going to need to be fielded in bigger units, things like Orc Boys for example, really do excel a lot more when they're in 30s rather than in small units. And again, I'd hope that they're pointed appropriately, so with all the changes in 9th edition, they can still be good if they're pointed low enough. While I do like the idea of blast weapons having more effect on hordes, I'm not 100% sure this would have been the way that I would have changed the rule, as it just seems very swingy depending on what sort of blast weapon you're firing, with some blast weapons getting either no bonus or loads of bonus depending on what horde they're shooting at. I think I might have been a bit more tempted to go something like a reroll of the number of shots rule, much like the cast cham one, as that's something that just scales a little bit better and has a more proportionate impact on all blast weapons rather than being massively better for some rather than others. I just feel that this one can be a bit of an arbitrary increase, with the important breakpoints being absolutely massive damage disparities, compared with progressively more damage against bigger units, as it sounds like was more intended. So let me know what you think of the blast weapon rules. I think it's really quite interesting the way that they've gone. Blast weapons and armies will both have big positives and big negatives. I'm sure that hordes will be scared of them, as they're pretty much going to be a direct counter. If you're assailed by hordes too much in the meta, then more blast weapons will be taken. On the other hand, taking them along in the army does mean that you're a lot more susceptible to getting locked up in close combat again, and I wouldn't be surprised if points cost have risen on them to take into account their new abilities. So thanks very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. If you've enjoyed, then feel free to subscribe. We'll certainly be covering more of the 9th edition rules as they come out. If you've been enjoying all the videos that I've been making on the channel recently, I'd just like to mention the channel's Patreon page, which is what allows me to spend quite so much time making videos about model soldiers. It's only with the generosity of the channel's Patreon supporters that I can afford to spend quite so much time away from my regular job, making YouTube videos. So if you are listening regularly, then any support is absolutely greatly appreciated, and you can find the link to the channel's Patreon down in the video description. As well as helping to support the creation of new content, channel Patreons get to see some of the videos for the channel before anyone else. I run regular polls to see what sort of videos people would like to see next, and there's also some monthly prize draws where I post out miniatures to lucky winning Patreons. If any of that sounds good, or you just like to help keep the videos coming, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.